The president delivered a speech recently in which he dealt with two topics: the situation in Iraq and the situation in Ferguson, Missouri. He spoke briefly about the Iraq situation and then spoke at length about the current showdown between cops and protesters in Ferguson. Now, I would have never guessed that Ferguson, Missouri would occupy the same breath as Iraq when discussing major issues facing the United States. But you know what? Here we are. And there are a number of issues that dovetail with the Ferguson problem. Now, what we know for sure is that Ferguson, Missouri currently is a war zone, and Michael Brown, an unarmed black youth, died of multiple gunshot wounds from the service weapon of a white police officer. We also know that numerous shots were fired when Brown was at a fairly decent range. Now, maybe you live in a world where it's okay for cops to shoot unarmed suspects at long range, but I don't, and I don't think most civilized people would want to live in that world. But what I love more than anything is the cigar theft issue. Now, in case you've been living in a cave for the last week, on the day the police finally released the name of Darren Wilson, the cop who shot Brown, they also released a video from a convenience store along with the suggestion that Brown had just stolen some cigars prior to being shot. Of course, no one at the store reported a theft or robbery, so if it did actually happen, why were the police even aware of it? And what were they looking for? But you know what? It doesn't matter. Everyone's talking about the damn cigars, and I'm here to tell you, it does not matter whether he stole cigars or not. Last time I checked, the punishment for cigar theft was not summary execution in the middle of the street. And besides, the police chief himself admitted that the shooting was unrelated to the alleged theft of the cigars. So, please, do us all a favor and just shut up about the cigars. Then, of course, you have the race issue. Ferguson, Missouri is a predominantly black town with a predominantly white police force with a predominantly dubious record of targeting blacks when conducting searches and making arrests. Clearly, the problem in Ferguson is racially charged. But I also want to point out that the problem is much larger than just race, and the problem reaches much further than just Ferguson. If you have money and live in the right neighborhoods, you have no worries. But if you're poor, then it's far more likely that heavy-handed police are going to be tossing you around like an orca playing with its food. Police should not be allowed to handle black people or poor people or any people differently because of the color of their skin, the address on their driver's license, or the balance in their bank account. We've also trained our police that violence is their job. Wrong. Peace is their job. Hell, they're often referred to as peace officers. Now, admittedly, that's not a term that gets much play nowadays, but it should. Police need to be taught that peace is the ultimate goal, not combat. Now, I'm not saying they shouldn't be prepared, but sending in an occupying army with armored vehicles and assault rifles is not making peace. That's making war. And you know what? We've done plenty of that overseas already, okay? And then, of course, there's the looting and vandalism. I don't condone mob rule and the destruction of property, but in this case, I'm not really surprised by it either. Excepting a few bad apples, most of the protesters in Ferguson are peaceful. The looting and vandalism aren't actions taken on behalf of the community. They are the reactions of a few people, and we would do well to remember that reactions have causes. Why are they looting and destroying property? Justified or not, what led up to it? The police and the residents of Ferguson, Missouri have been at odds for a long time, and I think we'd do well to ask ourselves why everyone in Ferguson is so pissed off. Now, if we approach that question honestly and objectively, I think we're going to find that abuse of power, militarized police, inescapable poverty, and systemic oppression have all contributed to the problem. I think we're also going to find that the problems in Ferguson exist in every corner of the country. Every damn day, some new story about police abuse comes to the fore. A grandmother beaten to a pulp, a toddler with a grenade tossed in its crib, an unarmed camper shot to death, a kid with Down syndrome brutalized, and there's just a few recent examples. I could go on and on and on. Incidents of police violence and abuse have risen steadily since the advent of the war on drugs, and they've risen exponentially since 9/11. The police are out of control. Now, what I mean when I say that is that the police are out of control. I'm not saying that there aren't good cops, because I know there are. What I'm saying is that the police are out of control. Can you hear me? Now more than ever, we need to police the police. Police should be held responsible for their actions, which brings me to my final point: accountability. More often than not, complaints against police go uninvestigated, or officers are found justified even when all the evidence points to abuse of power. Clearly, there's a buddy system at work here, which is why I think the first thing the Ferguson Police Department could do to restore the people's faith is to arrest Darren Wilson and charge him with first-degree murder. I think most of us would agree that police should be held to the same standards as any regular person. Many, including me, would argue that the police should be held to higher standards, but in any case, I don't think anyone's going to argue that police should be more above the law than any regular citizen. Well, let me tell you this: any regular civilian who shot and killed another unarmed human being in the way that Michael Brown was shot and killed would be immediately arrested, charged, and held on a bond of hundreds of thousands, if not millions of dollars. If Darren Wilson is innocent, then he can count on the same legal system he uses to pay his bills details to prove that his actions were justified. But until then, you don't just get to hit the streets like Rambo and gun unarmed people down with impunity. Even if you're a cop, even if you're dealing with a suspect, you don't get to be judge, jury, and executioner. We have people in place to do those things. You want peace in Ferguson? You're going to have to start by showing the people of Ferguson that the law works for them, not the cops. Step 1, charge Darren Wilson with murder. Until then, there is no step 2.